Today we will continue to take a look back at the Kansas City Chiefs history as we will take a blast in the past. We started this series on the year 2001 and we will work ourselves all the way back to last year. To kick off the series, in 2001, the Kansas City Chiefs welcomed head coach Dick Vermeil, quarterback Trent Green, and running back Priest Holmes. Now, there was some positives in the year 2001, but there was a lot more lows that the Kansas City Chiefs needed to correct if they wanted to be a playoff caliber team headed into 2002. And if you would like to watch that video, I have created a playlist for this series. The thumbnail will be listed above so you guys can have access to it. And if you do like this series, please leave a big thumbs up because it does help out this channel oh so much. Now, without further ado, let's dive into 2002. Headed into the 2002 season, there were some huge question marks for the Kansas City Chiefs and if they could take that next step. Because going into 2001, they brought in head coach Dick Vermeil, and he was already retooling his offense to the way he wanted it to look to make it similar to what the St. Louis Rams were. And it looked like the Kansas City Chiefs took a step back to what they previously were before the Dick Vermeil regime. At a 6-10 record, that is something that Chiefs Kingdom was not going to be happy with moving with forward. And as I did mention, there was a lot of question marks heading into the 2002 season. The biggest one I wanted to focus on was quarterback Trent Green because Dick Vermeil heavily invested in his guy. Trent Green was Dick Vermeil's guy all the way back with the St. Louis Rams, and Dick Vermeil showed how much he loved Trent Green and how much he would invest in him that the Kansas City Chiefs traded a first-round pick, a top 15 pick for Trent Green to be the face of the franchise for the Kansas City Chiefs. And Trent Green did have some very positive moments heading into 2002. But in that 2001 season, one thing that needed to be corrected heavily was the turnovers. He had 24 turnovers, and any quarterback in the NFL would not succeed with those turnover numbers, so Trent Green needed to get that corrected. And there was other areas the Kansas City Chiefs needed to focus on, still on the offensive side of the ball and immensely on the defensive side of the ball because that is where they would struggle, and unfortunately, where they would continue to struggle in 2002. Now, as we transition into the offseason, there was key pieces that the Kansas City Chiefs lost in veteran linebacker Donnie Edwards and wide receiver Derek Alexander, and they had to find a way to replace these guys, and they didn't do it initially. The one guy that replaced right away was Derek Alexander. Even though he had a nice long career with the Kansas City Chiefs, they decided to move forward, and they ended up adding wide receiver out of Detroit, Johnny Morton. Now, Johnny Morton, one of the funnest wide receivers I've watched as a Kansas City Chief growing up. Now, stat line and maybe game to game, he wasn't the most exciting, thrilling player, but he was someone when he got the ball, he was fun to watch, and definitely when he found his way in the end zone. Wasn't that frequently with the Kansas City Chiefs, but when he did, the worm would bust out and he would bust out that crazy dance move, and he was a sight to see when he was in the end zone. So that was very fun to watch. But as I mentioned, one thing Dick Vermeil loved to do with the Kansas City Chiefs and what he was trying to tool his offense around was a power running scheme, basically to replicate what the St. Louis Rams were doing when he was there. Everyone remembers the Kurt Warner, Torrey Holt, Isaac Bruce, but one thing that made the St. Louis Rams run was Marshall Faulk. And we saw in the Kansas City Chiefs era, the first year under Dick Vermeil, he ran Priest Holmes heavy. And he wanted to solidify that in this free agency with bringing another trade and trading for the future left tackle, Hall of Fame left tackle, in Willie Rolfe. And man, that solidified a great line for the Kansas City Chiefs for the better part of 3 to 4 years to where Priest Holmes would eat under this offensive line and be one of the best running backs in football. And as the Kansas City Chiefs started to wrap up the NFL free agency going into 2002, the only key notable signing that basically caught my eye, and there's probably other good players out there that Chiefs Kingdom can bring to my attention, but with my young self and the players I remember, those are the ones that caught my eye, specifically Willie Rolfe and, of course, Johnny Morton. But the old wily veteran himself, kicker Morton Anderson, I think he was 65 coming in as a Kansas City Chiefs player. I know he wasn't that old, but he was pushing 40, if not 40 already. Morton Anderson and then Gary Anderson, the brothers, felt like they were kicking in the NFL for the longest period of time. And I believe Morton Anderson retired playing his final seasons as a Kansas City Chief. But now, as we transition into the NFL draft period, the Kansas City Chiefs held the 6th overall pick in that year's NFL draft, and they decided to address it by drafting defensive tackle Ryan Sims. And I hate throwing labels on players like that, but Ryan Sims, let's just say he didn't live up to the 6th number 1 overall pick. And I remember, as we discussed in the 2001 episode, that this draft was very underwhelming itself. The most notable player in this draft class was linebacker Scott Fujita, and he wasn't the greatest linebacker. Now, he did have a really good NFL career as he played like 9-10 seasons, and he was able to go team to team. But as a Kansas City Chief, he wasn't that all-star linebacker that what the Kansas City Chiefs were expecting. Honestly, another name that popped out was wide receiver Mark Richter, and he wasn't even drafted. He was undrafted, and we will get more into Mark Richter as later on in this episode as it goes. But yeah, if you were looking back, 15 years, and you look back on this draft class, you might rate this draft class another D, which back-to-back consecutive draft classes for Dick Vermeil, it's kind of very underwhelming. Now, Dick Vermeil, he was making his presence in the NFL free agency where he brought his guys like Trent Green, Priest Holmes, and then he brings in a guy like Willie Rolfe and now Morton Anderson. He was bringing the right veteran pieces, but it seemed like when it came draft season, that's when they struggled. Now, of course, in time, it looks like it's all good, and you look like these players can mold and be the future of the Kansas City Chiefs. But now, as we head into the regular season and we wrap up the free agency and the NFL draft period for the Kansas City Chiefs in 2002, this was a huge year for the Kansas City Chiefs, as I mentioned. This was a year that Dick Vermeil needed to take another step to show why he was heavily invested and why the Kansas City Chiefs brought him out of retirement and why they believed in him so much. And he started the season off with a thriller against the Cleveland Browns as they took a great win. And I want to believe, was it OT or the final seconds? And it was mostly the Cleveland Browns' fault. I remember this game and I didn't even know what was going on because I believe I was in the 4th or 5th grade. And I remember the Browns player just threw his helmet off, which extended the game because the Kansas City Chiefs didn't convert. And then you throw your helmet off, it gives the team an extra 15-yard penalty. It puts the Kansas City Chiefs in field goal range, and Morton Anderson wins the game. And that was a great way for the Kansas City Chiefs to start the season. And honestly, throughout the season, it was another roller coaster ride of a season, but this one had more ups than downs than the previous season of 2001, where you saw a lot of downs and you saw Kansas City Chiefs try to fight back and end the season off on a high note. This was really a roller coaster where it went back and forth, and there was never really that much consistency throughout the 2002 NFL season for the Kansas City Chiefs. They finished the season off at 8-8. And one thing at the time we shouldn't have found surprising, but we did, was running back Priest Holmes. Priest Holmes was literally such a diamond in the rough. He ended the 2001 season with over 1,500 yards and double-digit touchdowns. And that already seemed damn near impossible to stop. But in 2002, he topped it. He had over 1,600 yards and 21 touchdowns. And if that just wasn't enough, he missed the final 2 games. He literally didn't play the last 2 games with injury and was crucial because the Kansas City Chiefs ended the season off at 8-8, and they were literally could have been in playoff contention if Priest Holmes was there. Because as I mentioned, Dick Vermeil made it a focal point that Priest Holmes would be the leader of this offense. And that's just what he was, quite frankly. And also to start this video off, someone I said I was going to keep my eyes heavily zoned in on was quarterback Trent Green and see if he improved, if he cut down the turnovers. And boy, did he improve. And boy, did he cut down the turnovers. Now, yes, he still did throw 13 interceptions, and that is still a lot of turnovers. But to cut it down by almost 11 turnovers is huge. And the fact that he threw 10 more touchdowns is also huge. And it was a key leader and key factor to why the Kansas City Chiefs had the #1 offense in 2002. I think the most disappointing fact in the 2002 season for the Kansas City Chiefs was the defense. And honestly, it's something we're going to get accustomed to talking about throughout this series because this Kansas City Chiefs defense probably shot this whole team's 2002 hopes dead, because there was 4 games where the Kansas City Chiefs scored over 35 points and lost. Now think about that. The Kansas City Chiefs ended the season off at 8-8. And if they had some sort of defense and the Kansas City Chiefs offense was still scoring over 35 points, they could have finished the year off at 12-4. It was something that this defense was known to do, but also they did show some bright spots in the middle parts of November and December where they held opponents under 24 points, I think 3 consecutive times in a row. But those huge moments where they pop out where this offense did more, way more than enough to win games and the defense didn't support was critical. And I backtrack to how we focus on Patrick Mahomes, and I believe in that season, his first year, when we always said, damn, if Mahomes had a defense, we would have been Super Bowl champions when we lost to the New England Patriots with Dee Ford being offsides. But man, that 2002 season, and we're going to talk more going into 2003, those defenses were tough to watch because Dick Vermeil had something special cooking on the offensive side of the ball, but the defense just seemed to not get it clicking. But also, as we move forward, we're going to discuss there was some key contributors on the defensive side of the ball. It's just there were some areas that needed to be fixed, and specifically when you have the 28th ranked defense in 2002 and you have the number 1 ranked offense, you see how it boys out and how to work so great at the end of the day. And I think the most critical loss of them all, and even though Priest Holmes was out, was those final 2 losses at the end of the season. One in specific was against the Raiders, where they couldn't even put up a point and they lost by a final of 24-0. It was huge. Not with the division on the line, but with potential playoff hopes on the line. And as I mentioned, and I undersold it actually a little bit. I said the Kansas City Chiefs lost 4 games by scoring more than 35 points. They actually scored more than 40 points and lost all 4 games. That is crazy to think about. That Dick Vermeil's offense was putting up those kind of numbers, but couldn't find a way to win a game. And we will see going into 2003 if that was to change. I will let you know the offense was still clicking, but defense just had its moments. Now, as we focus on how the Kansas City Chiefs wrapped up this season, we're going to focus on the standings, the AFC West standings. The only thing that changed, well, of course, the standings did rearrange, but now, going into 2002, we don't have 5 teams no more. We have 4 teams, and it would be the Oakland Raiders, the Denver Broncos, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the San Diego Chargers. And the Oakland Raiders won the division at 11-5. The Denver Broncos were in second at 9-7, and the San Diego Chargers and the Kansas City Chiefs rounded it off at 8-8. As you see, it was a highly competitive division. To have your worst team in the division be 500 shows you that's a very, very competitive division. It's something that we expected the division to be last year, and the Kansas City Chiefs just steamrolled everybody. That is what AFC West football was back in the day, and it's what we're anticipating to see in the future. Now, as we start wrapping up the season and we go over the accolades, we'll start talking about the Pro Bowl nominees. We had, of course, tight end Tony Gonzalez, newly acquired, it wasn't even acquired, he was an undrafted guy who stole all of Kansas City Chiefs Kingdom's hearts immediately was Dante Hall, the kick returner. He made it in on his first year as a kick returner. And in the 2002 season, he had 2 punt returns. But boy, wait till we get into 2003 because Dante Hall became special. And then, of course, Priest Holmes made the Pro Bowl. You had Will Shields, and then you had newly acquired left tackle and Willie Rolfe making the Pro Bowl. That O-line was just about to get damn right filthy. And as we go over some quick stats, as I mentioned, Trent Green vastly improved from 2001. Having over 27 touchdowns and lowering his interception total to 13 is huge. Is it still a lot of turnovers? Yes. But when you threw over 24 in 2001, it is huge. And then you focus on a guy like Priest Holmes, someone who had an absurd first year as the Kansas City Chiefs, just capped it off with even more of a ridiculous year, going for over 1,600 yards and 21 touchdowns in 14 games. That is nuts. And then the leading wide receiver on the Kansas City Chiefs was Eddie Kennison, who had over 900 yards. Eddie Kennison was going to start to become a familiar, popular face in the wide receiver room for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, As we transition to the defensive side of the ball on stats, again, defense, nothing too crazy popped out. But one of my favorite key players watching as a Kansas City Chiefs when I was younger was safety Greg Wesley. I feel like Greg Wesley was one of the most underrated players mentioned as a defensive player. Now, I don't know if it's because he played for some terrible Kansas City Chiefs defenses or if he just went unrecognized, or maybe as a kid, I didn't know what I was watching and he may not have been all that good. But in 2002, Greg Wesley had 6 interceptions. And man, Greg Wesley was just so much fun to watch. He was the real number 25 to me before Jamal Charles came to town. He was that exciting to watch. Now, Jamal Charles, of course, is the real number 25. But if you didn't know 25 before Jamal Charles, I think you need to put a little respect on Greg Wesley's name. And then Eric Hicks, he led the Kansas City Chiefs with 9 sacks. And basically, those were your 2 stat leaders on the defensive side of the ball. Again, you can't expect nothing too crazy stat-wise from this defense as they ranked in total 28th. And going into 2003, that is something that needed to improve vastly if this team wanted to be a playoff caliber team. I just can't get over the fact that the Kansas City Chiefs were 8-8 in 2002, and there was 4 games they scored more than 40 points, and they lost them. Like, that is so crazy. They could have easily been 12-4 and leading the division, but unfortunately, the Oakland Raiders won the division that year. With that, Chiefs Kingdom, we are going to wrap up the year 2002, and we will head into 2003 on our next episode. Again, please let me know how you feel about this series in the comments down below and what you remember about your earliest memories of the Kansas City Chiefs. If you did like this video, please leave a big thumbs up and do subscribe to the channel because we will continue to do this series. And also, I gotta keep you up to date on anything Kansas City Chiefs related. So we will get back to that once news starts flowing and once I start creating a little bit more rumors. And with that, I'm gonna take out. Y'all take care. Peace.